Welcome to King County Connects, a program where we connect you with some of the important issues in the county. I'm Enrique Cerna. How do we protect kids from becoming victims in the sex trade? King County is working to train schools and parents to recognize warning signs. We're talking today with Superior Court Judge Barbara Mack. Judge Mack is with the Commercially Sexually Exploited Children Task Force, and she's here to talk about it and also explain how it all came about. Take me back. This has been going, the whole process of creating this task force started when?
It started a couple of years ago when the Center for Children and Youth Justice, led by retired Justice Bobby Bridge and somebody who worked there, Terry Kimball, who you may know of, who was very active on this issue, started a series of statewide meetings to get an idea of the scope of the problem, and they came up with this Project Respect in order to try and come up with ideas about how to deal with the children, because we know from studies that have done previously that in King County alone, there are 300 to 500 of these children working every day. It's a big number. And the number has been growing, really, as I understand it, and really kind of up and down the I-5 corridor from here to Portland. Anecdotally, it's growing. One of our big challenges is getting those numbers, and that's one of the things we're working on. When we talk about the numbers of 300 to 500, but isn't that one of the challenges here, to try to find data and information to give you really more of an exact count, because nobody really knows for sure? It is, and that's one of the things we're doing now. We've started the data collection effort. It's being coordinated by CCYJ with the Washington state court system, and we had pilot projects for data collection until the middle of April, end of April, and now we're beginning to use that tool to collect better data. Now, I understand that in the process of kind of getting this going, there were mini summits held in places around the state. Tell me about that. There were mini summits in different parts of the state to see what the challenges are and what the issues are in different jurisdictions. And as a result of those, the CCYJ, working with all of those people, came up with a model statewide protocol. And then they asked for proposals for local task forces to implement and adapt that to local situations. The King County Court, applied for one of those technical assistance grants, and that's how the King County Task Force on Commercially Sexually Exploited Children was born. And we had our first task force meeting just a little over a year ago in April of 2013. Tell me about, what do we know of these kids? Well, good question. We know that they all come from different circumstances. We know that they are primarily girls, but they are by no means all girls. There are a lot of boys who are involved in this for a lot of reasons. We know that most of them are runaways. We know that a huge number of them have been abused as children before they ever got into this. Children get into this business, and it is a big business in many ways. Sometimes kids get kicked out of their houses. Sometimes the parents can't handle them and the kids run. Sometimes the children leave because they are being or have been abused. Sometimes they're children who are very vulnerable because they have mental health issues. Sometimes the children are at a mall and some guy comes up and compliments them and sees that they're vulnerable and they get groomed. We know that that happens at places like Westlake Mall. We know it is even happening in schools. It's also a problem with gangs. There are multiple ways that children get into this, but the common denominator is abuse as a child. You mentioned the gangs. I believe there was a gang prosecuted here in King County just, I believe, a couple of years ago. They gave some insight into how they operated and how they really would manipulate a lot of these young people into becoming part of the business, really. They do. They pick children, girls and boys, who are vulnerable, and they definitely groom them. And once they're groomed, then it can frequently be incredibly violent. Anybody who thinks this is a victimless crime is just wrong. They don't know anything about it.
Now, one of the things that the task force has been, and these protocols that you've tried to develop here, is really taking a different approach in how you look at the teen that might be involved in teen prostitution, in the sense of not really labeling them as a criminal, but looking to them as a victim or a survivor.
We do see them as victims, and King County in Washington, and I think in many places around the country, is leading the way in terms of how law enforcement sees these children. And they are children. They are sometimes 12, 13, 14 years old. And the law enforcement in King County is totally on board with seeing these children as victims. When I see them in my court, in juvenile court, they're charged with assault or malicious mischief or robbery or something else. They're not charged with prostitution.
And so that idea of not labeling them as a criminal, but again as a victim or a survivor, why is that important?
Well, it's important because they are victims. They're not criminals. They didn't go. A criminal assumes that somebody made a choice to do something bad. These children didn't make that choice. These children were forced into it either through survival sex or because they were manipulated or violently abducted, which does happen.
Seeing these kids in court, tell me about that. How difficult, what are the stories that you hear?
The stories are very complicated, and they are multifaceted. A lot of these children come out of the child welfare system. There are a lot of kids who run from home or run from foster care for a variety of reasons. A lot of the children who run from foster care have no real attachments to anybody because when they were little, their parents were addicted, doing drugs, paying no attention to them. They never got any care. They never had a full-time caregiver. And those kids have one set of problems. We have kids who suffer from serious post-traumatic stress from seeing a life of violence, whether it's domestic abuse or sexual abuse or violence on the streets. When your parents are on the streets and you're on the streets, there's violence out there. A lot of them are addicts because, as I say to the kids in court, I say, well, why do you use this drug? And the answer is, well, then I don't have to deal with the pain. And they do. They are really suffering from this lifestyle. And on the one hand, on the other hand, some of them are addicted to the lifestyle because even despite the violence and the kinds of lives they're living, sometimes that pimp is the only person who has ever provided them with anything, and they think that that person is the only person who cares.
And it may be all they know.
It may be all they know.
Yeah. Let's talk about the efforts now to get out in the county and train people, parents, others, to really be aware of these young people. Tell me about that process and what's happening.
All right. One of the things we are doing in our effort is training anybody who might come in contact with a trafficked or at risk for being trafficked child. And we train them on how to identify the child and what to do once they're identified. We have a warning signs sheet that has been distributed all over the county to schools, to shelters, to law enforcement, all of our partners in the community. And we offer free training. And we have 8-hour training for people who are going to be interacting with these kids, and we have shorter trainings for others. We train people in schools, including counselors and teachers. We train hospital employees. We've trained CASA employees, treehouse employees, children's administration, law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, anybody who might touch these kids, so that they can refer them appropriately to an advocate. We have trained since October 600 people. And we have a partner in the task force in the community called BEST, Businesses to End Slavery and Trafficking. And they train hotel and motel employees and managers to work with law enforcement. They've trained about 450 people. So, and they train statewide, but most of their training's been in King County. So just in the last 8-10 months, we've trained a lot of people.
There's another organization called Youth Care that's involved
Youth
as well.
Care is very important, our very important partner. Youth Care is an important player in the county in terms of providing programs and shelter to runaway kids. But they have, they run and supervise our advocates program. The idea is that once somebody is trained and recognizes one of these children, they make a referral through either a 24/7 hotline or an email referral site, and then an advocate responds to that. And once an advocate responds, then the child is connected with services, if appropriate, through a multidisciplinary task force. The advocates are from Friends of Youth, Auburn Youth Resources, and Youth Care. They are specially trained in dealing with commercially sexually exploited children.
So tell me about the training. What are the people that go through the training, what are they being taught? What are they looking for?
The full training is for people who are going to be part of a multidisciplinary team. That's the 8-hour training. The 4-hour training is to understand the kinds of things you've been asking me about, why children end up in this lifestyle, what got them there, how to deal with them, how to identify them. The training is really, I've been to 2 of them, it is really impressive.
What's different, and I guess, in the approach now? You know, we've talked about this, looking at them not so much as criminals, but as victims and survivors. How then is that applied in the training, and what's broken down from that as far as, I guess, and how people will understand and work with these young people?
The whole premise of the training is that these children are victims, and it is how to deal with them without sensationalizing the problem, dealing with them as people, getting their input into what they need. We've had children, for example, each child, as I said, is frequently involved with different parts of our system. So if a child comes before me and they're in the offender system, the juvenile justice system, they've already got a probation counselor. They can get referred to an advocate. They usually do get referred to an advocate if they are suspected of being a sexually exploited child. But they may also be involved with the child welfare system. They may have a school counselor that's been working with them. So we bring in the people who are already involved with this child, this would be a multidisciplinary team, and figure out what else is needed. And we do that by asking the child, in part, what they need. The problem with these kids is so many of them are runners, and this is why the advocacy piece is so important, that if they have somebody they can connect with, even if they run, they come back and come back and come back until they're willing to give it up.
Is
it's
it
a
all
long process.
All about trust?
It's all about trust.
Yeah, yeah. And gaining that trust, I would imagine, is pretty hard, since most of these young people have been through awful situations. And if they have a pimp that's, you know, on them all the time as well.
It is hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
So part of this too, the King County Police, all of the 39 police entities, they are all involved, and they have all, you know, signed off that they want to be involved in that. How important is that in all of this?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And I can give you an example of how this works. We had a detective who was about to make some arrests with the people who were alleged to have committed armed robbery. And he knew that one of those people, a juvenile girl, had a pimp and was being trafficked. And before arresting her, the detective called an advocate. And that's really a sea change in the way law enforcement sees these kids. And the detective had been trained, and we're making inroads here.
Is that thinking that, okay, there's a human being here that needs help, and we have a way of connecting them already, whereas in the past it might have been, well, let's arrest them and that's
right.
it. Yeah. And how has that changed in other areas, I guess, in dealing with prosecutors and things like that? Has there been change there as well?
Huge change. Prosecutors are very involved in this, very involved in the task force. And they are now, along with law enforcement, really addressing the demand issue. You know, if we have 300 to 500 children out on the street every night being trafficked, and out on the street is a euphemism, it could be being trafficked online, but it's in our area. And you multiply that by the numbers of men they interact with every night, there's a huge market out there for children, and it's shocking.
Yeah. You mentioned that they can be trafficked online.
They can.
Talk about that.
Well, we all know about the places online where these mostly girls are advertised, and it is pretty easy to dress up a 14-year-old and make her look like a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old. And the truth is that the people who are out there looking don't really care about how old these kids are. And the police are working those cases. Everybody's got limited resources, but they are definitely working those cases.
You mentioned that Judge Bobby Bridge, former State Supreme Court Justice, as well as a former King County Superior Court
yes.
Judge, and she has a foundation that is very involved and actually helped provide in the funding, or at least the initial grants and all of this. How did they finally recognize that this was something that needed to be moved on?
Well, I think you'd have to ask her that, but I think everybody recognized it was a growing problem, particularly after the big cases that hit the news a few years ago, the ones you mentioned about the gangs. And there were a number of people in this county who were very conscious of the problem and trying to figure out how to deal with it, and recognized that it had to be dealt with in a more comprehensive way, because just prosecution, any one of these things alone isn't going to solve the problem, because these children are all so different and they need so many different resources.
Have we failed to really recognize just how big a problem this is, or how it has been increasing?
Possibly. I mean, I don't think I had any idea how big the problem was, and I'm fairly knowledgeable, until I got to juvenile court and started seeing these children day after day after day.
And you'd been a prosecutor for a long time.
And I had been a prosecutor, yes.
And was that just because you were then hearing the cases and seeing the young people as well?
And I was in juvenile court, and that makes a big difference, because they come in and you hear some of these stories and you think, where have I been? Yeah.
The other part of this that I know that is a challenge, we've talked with some numbers here, and that is what, 300 to 500, I believe, here in King County. At least that's what we're looking at. But it's also been established that nobody really knows that there could be far more young people. So talk about the data part of this, and how important that is to try to get a grip on how extensive this is.
There are two data issues that are really important. One is the data to figure out how many of these children there are, where they're from, what the demographics are, so that we can get into the communities where they are and really identify and help them. And that we are doing. We have a new screening tool. People are using it to try and get that information. It is difficult because a hospital may see one of these children, but nobody else has seen the child. And if you don't have everybody doing the screening, and we have so many different places they go, you're never going to get an accurate number. So what we're going to end up with is a ballpark based on children who are on probation, who come into detention, who come into the court system, who are in the child welfare system, who go through shelters, who see an advocate. We will have that data, but it won't be complete because there will be children who never come into these systems that are out there.
And there's the online part, as you mentioned, as
Yes,
well as
exactly.
other parts of this too. Is this unique, what's being done here across the country?
It is unique in terms of the scope of what we're doing. There are some jurisdictions that are doing parts of what we're doing, but our task force includes law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, children's administration, the school systems, including somebody from the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction in Olympia. We have Harborview, we have private nonprofits, we have youth care, we have other service providers. It's huge. And everybody is working together on establishing the best protocol, working on the multidisciplinary team aspect of it. And it is just, I've never seen anything like it in anything I've worked on.
That much collaboration, people coming together to do it.
And the complete dedication of the people who are working on this.
Money. To do all of this, I mean, to do the studies, to develop the training, it's going to be costly.
Well, that's very interesting because sustainability is always a big issue. One of the things I think that makes this work is that because we have all these different moving parts, they're all different agencies, private and public, and everybody's giving their resources they already have. It's not costing the task as a whole lot of money, except that we were very privileged to get funding for our task force coordinator. She's not full-time. She could be full-time, but she's not full-time. But she's really the person who keeps all this together because she can be out in the community or organizing trainings and doing all of the contacting, communicating, coordinating that each of those individual members doesn't have time to take on.
I mean, there's obviously a moral concern here as well, but from a taxpayer point of view and in dealing with this issue, how does it help? How does it, make a difference?
Well, that comes to the second part of the data issue that I was going to talk about, and I will tell you what I believe is going to happen. To really get that number, we need to have an outcomes evaluation, and we are currently designing a study to do outcomes evaluation, but that involves tracking these children once they're in the system and seeing what happens and how our process is effective or not, and where it's effective and what needs to be changed. What you have to think of is this. These children are, a substantial number of them are addicts. That costs the public. Many of them are not in school. That costs the public because, when they get out of school, they're going to be on welfare. They're going to be using healthcare resources. Most of them don't have insurance. Most of them, they have health problems. They commit crimes. They commit a lot of crimes. That's why I see them. Yeah. So all of those things cost the community money in terms of law enforcement, in terms of lost property or damaged property, in terms of health care, in terms of substance abuse treatment. So I think that if our multidisciplinary system works, and I strongly believe it will, then I think the taxpayers will be far better off.
How does this affect you? I mean, you're in court, you hear these cases of, young people every day. I've been in juvenile court and covered that through the years, and it's heartbreaking at times.
It can be. It's very different. As you probably know, our courts, our Superior Court is a court of general jurisdiction, and doing, for example, complex civil cases is very intellectually challenging. Doing these kinds of cases is very emotionally challenging, and I think you have to have somebody who can do that without being hardened
Right, right. But there must be a tremendous amount of satisfaction in this part of it, knowing that something actually now is being done that could have some positive effects long term. And how do you deal with that community?
It is very satisfying. I have great hopes for this process, and I have seen in court not only the kids who run and keep coming back on warrants, but I've seen the kids who've succeeded. I had one of them in front of me this morning, and it was just wonderful. After being in front of me, well, I can't talk about a specific case, but I mean, she's been appearing in front of me for a long time, and she's got her act together, and she looked great. And that's, you know, probation counselor comes in and says, she's doing the best she's ever done, she's in compliance, and, you know, wow. She's going to school, she's doing this. And I had a child, now 18, several months ago who came in. She'd been in the court system since she was 12, 13, something like that. And she was a trafficked child. And although the task force wasn't in existence, she had a de facto multidisciplinary team. And she came into court with a room full of probation counselors, service providers, her mom, a whole bunch of people. And she had gotten a special sentence that kept her from going to JRA. Took her a long time to get her act together. She had been an addict. She got clean. She got a GED. She got a job. She had her child. She was clean and sober, and she made it. She pulled herself up with the help of this big support system who were all there to applaud her. So it does work.
Judge Barbara Mack, thank you very much for giving us some insights into this effort, and let's hope it has some long-term success. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
My pleasure. All right, that's all for this edition of King County Connects. Please visit us online at kingcounty.gov/KCTV. I'm Enrique Serna, and we'll see you next time.